nearest American vessel to the wreckage, a Virginia-class submarine, the USS North Dakota, had directed its sonar toward the crash coordinates as soon as the American embassy in Beijing had alerted Washington of the incident. The North Dakota's sonar picked up something curious. 3 Chinese military vessels were already circling the coordinates, well before the time Beijing would eventually claim their search and rescue boats had arrived on the scene.
The plane went down just after dusk, so our sats were behind through all the action. At first light, the scene looked like this.
On the first satellite image, the imagery analyst drew a circle around a cluster of oblong dark spots that stood out against the ocean's deep green morning hue.
These are the Chinese Navy's standard search and rescue vessels, the same sort of thing they'd send out for a crippled fishing boat. But the 3 boats pinged by the North Dakota read a lot more like these.
A new satellite image filled the screen, this one of Shanghai's bustling port at the mouth of the Yangtze River. The analyst zoomed in on 3 larger vessels docked along its northern end.
This is Daybreak, 50 miles west of the crash site, in a section of the port used by the Navy. And here are our 3 boats. Judging from all this vehicle and personnel traffic around them, it looks like they've returned from working overnight.
Bright looked away from the grainy boats and glanced up at the string course of digital clocks circling the room. It was 0830 hours in Beijing, 2030 hours in Washington. The plane had gone down nearly 13 hours earlier, and he'd been in the windowless ops center since 2 hours after that, as soon as the State Department had learned of the ambassador's fate. 11 straight hours spent among the indicator lights, the glowing maps, the screens and their live feeds. He was not proud of the addictive rush being in this environment provided. Days passed in his sunny office meant that operations were running smoothly and the world was ordered, but those days were often tinged with boredom. What brought him to life were the hours spent in the ops center, which usually meant that a crisis had developed in some critical part of the world. Lives were in jeopardy or had been lost. Bright shook his head.
So they had boats waiting out there to collect the data recorders. Or they had the plane bugged and were prepared to recover the audio. We'd have done the same thing. Have we confirmed that the plane was owned by who?
Bright wanted to bring the conversation back to the Chinese businessman. The crash of Hu Lan's jet was a peculiar development, coming just 48 hours after the news story published by Gnosis had exposed Hu's financial ties with the Ministry of State Security. It was no surprise, of course, that Hu had ties to the MSS, but for China to play in the global economy, it was in their interest to keep secret even the possibility of such ties between the Chinese government and its leading business figures. They might not have any qualms about cheating in the global markets, but they had enough tact to not want to get caught. The news story about Hu was a black eye. America's top diplomat dying in Hu's airplane was another one. Either this was a pile of coincidences, or there had been an uncharacteristic slip-up within China's intelligence community.
Yes, sir, the plane was Hu's. NSA identified the aircraft from activity intercepted from the tower at Pudong. It was a private jet, tail number registered to Hu's company.
Do our dips usually fly private? One of the analysts asked. Why was Rogers even on board?
Because we asked him to be,
Bright said. The room fell into a somber silence. The more he thought about it, the less he liked the timing of all of this, the public revelation of Hu's links to the MSS and then the downed plane, but he couldn't draw a straight line between any of the potential causes and effects.
Any chatter from Hu about the crash?
Not yet. We're going back over intercepts from his staff, investment partners, and his wife.
That news story about Hu came from Gnosis,
Bright said.
How'd Gnosis get the scoop? A whistleblower inside Hu's camp?
In addition to generating articles based on facts that emerged from tirelessly mining the internet, Gnosis was also a known hub for whistleblowers and activists who wanted to anonymously submit information that was not already available online. Gnosis's top-level domain, the .is, meant the site was registered in Iceland, where such activity was protected by liberal free speech laws.
There's no evidence of that yet, but it seems more likely than the alternative, that there's a leak inside the MSS.
Bright feared a more alarming possibility, one that he had so far kept to himself, that the leak of information to Gnosis had come from one of the men and women within the CIA's China division, possibly someone in this room. Bright and his team had discovered months earlier, well before the Gnosis story, that Hu Lan had received funds from the Ministry of State Security, funneled to him through the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. Bright had decided to sit on this bit of intelligence and watch Hu, keeping enough distance to let him attempt to